Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 97th episode of the Veritas fact-finding series. And today I'm joined by our special guest, Mr. Sam Cooper. Good morning, Sam.
Thanks for having me.
Surfacing facts and revealing truths is a never-ending quest for us at Veritas. In each episode of the fact-finding series, we go on the ground to speak to professionals in an unscripted, candid video format to discover how we can make better investment decisions. In this series and in everything we do, we believe the facts empower investors, and the better information leads to better investment decisions. By way of background, my name is Anthony Scilipoti, and I'm the president and CEO of Veritas, which is an independent equity research firm based in Toronto, Canada, and I'm proud to say celebrating over 22 years being 100% employee-owned and operated. Quick disclaimer. This broadcast is not to be taken as investment advice, and participants or employees of the Veritas group of companies may own securities discussed in this broadcast. While we love all our guests, this session may contain forward-looking statements, investment opinions, and comments that we may or may not agree with at all. Now, for those of you that don't know Sam Cooper, he's an award-winning Canadian investigative journalist who's presented his findings on corruption, money laundering, transnational crime, and law enforcement to law enforcement agencies, legal and financial professionals, and academics internationally. He graduated with an honors degree in history, philosophy, and English from the University of Toronto, so we know he can write and he can think. And he has a certificate in journalism from the Langara College. He's worked for the Vancouver province, the Vancouver Sun, and currently works for Global News. Cooper's first book, Wilful Blindness, is now a Canadian bestseller, and its second edition, really exciting, was just published in June of 2022. I'm still waiting for my copy, and I'm going to get Sam to autograph it for me at our housing conference. And Sam, great to have you on. I want to start out, let's just tell us about your background. Why do you do what you do, and how the heck did you get into becoming an investigative journalist?
Well, as you mentioned in my little blurb, my bio there, I attended University of Toronto, and I took what I understood was a pre-law sort of requisite courses. So we're looking at my interests in history, philosophy, English. I did my logic, and my plan was to attend law school after the University of Toronto. And the way it worked out, I sort of felt inside that law wasn't really for me as the traditional standard career. I wanted to get into journalism and writing, but as soon as I was professionally employed in journalism, I guess not surprisingly, I found that I started to gravitate towards, the really hard-hitting legal stories. Sitting in courtrooms, I found that was almost a bit of a legal education, that I had missed that law school training, but sitting in courtrooms, learning fact finding, the thresholds of establishing evidence, I really was really inspired by it. And so very soon I found myself gravitating towards the same investigative techniques that police officers, lawyers, intelligence officers use. And so I started to write about these hard-hitting stories in Vancouver. At the same time, I became very interested internationally in real estate. This was around the time of the subprime crisis in the United States. I became, obsessed with the details there. And so I started to turn my mind to, if this was happening in the United States, we also had an extremely inflated housing market in Vancouver. So what were the
don't say that.
Well, it was beyond doubt then, and it's beyond doubt now. Look, the local incomes I knew, because I had a good local income, a two spouse income, was not helping us get any closer to a home in Vancouver. So look, I started to delve deep into the reasons and found that it wasn't the traditional, Wall Street toxic a financial Frankenstein product story. It was a different kind of lending. It was a different kind of investment. And all roads seemed to lead offshore to discover, the massive flows coming into Vancouver real estate. So in a nutshell, that's what gets me into reporting on what I believed was the high influence of the development industry in Vancouver City Hall, BC politics, and also, the nuts and bolts of how this money was getting into British Columbia real estate. And so I just started to push those stories, dig and dig, find threads, just what people would tell me now is, dogged, classic investigative techniques of not accepting answers that are pat, looking for real evidence. And that's the path that I started to follow from about 2008, 2009 in Vancouver.
All right. So in the intro of your book, there's a description. It says it started in 1982 in Hong Kong. And you walk through how certain very powerful Hong Kong individuals and Chinese individuals led to and were somehow involved even in the transition of Hong Kong into the hands of China. And then you spoke to how this actually made or allowed money to start to flow to Vancouver and into the Vancouver market. Maybe you could talk to what were some of these threads that you pulled on? What did you find? And what was happening?
Yeah, well, the 1982 timeline is really at the end of my journey. I started to pull in and access both directly through conversations and guidance on previous intelligence reports, just incredibly high level geopolitical focused Canadian international crime focused assessments where Western intelligence agencies, so Canada, Australia, the United States, gathered from Hong Kong that these individuals who were highly powerful Hong Kong tycoons involved in banking, real estate, the largest landowners in Macau, the casino operators in Macau, these types of networks, two of their high-level associates, let's call them, had met with Chinese officials, the top Chinese official in 1982, and the discussion was the Chinese Communist Party wants to get into international capitalism. It realizes that its associated tycoon businessmen friends in Hong Kong can both be educators and the keys to accessing international markets, because we're talking about individuals that then and now have deep roots in international banking, Canadian banks. And so as the story goes from the intelligence assessments, Canada learned that there was a compact of sorts made between these high-level Hong Kong businessmen who, as my book outlines, are not only powerful businessmen, but have direct financial connections to the secret triad societies. And so a deal was made where the Chinese Communist Party would get business assistance from the Hong Kong tycoon elites and business elites to invest internationally. And these high-level businessmen with underground financial connections would get assistance and, you could say, protection from the Chinese Communist Party. And to jump to the chase, we could talk for the length of a few books about what this means internationally, what it could mean to what's happening in Taiwan, or what could happen in Taiwan in the next few years. But this, I found, was very influential to investment trends in Canada, in banking, real estate, resources, and of course, as I like to say, casinos are the most evident area where this compact between Chinese organized crime and the Chinese Communist Party can be seen to be extremely influential in Canada's casino business. But Canada's casino business is the proverbial tip of the iceberg to those other larger markets, real estate, capital markets, resource investment.
Right. So you actually name the individuals in the book. So I guess you could just tell us their names so everybody can follow along. But who are the names of these individuals you mentioned?
Sure. I mean, in the case of the 1982 meeting, and I'm not directly alleging involvement in organized crime, I'm saying these individuals, according to Western police records, have associations to high-level organized crime. That's how business works in Hong Kong. So we're talking about Li Ka-shing, who your viewers will know very well, extremely wealthy, powerful Hong Kong businessman with direct and admitted connections to the Chinese Communist Party. The other individual, I believe, would be a man named Mr. Fok, F-O-K,
Yeah.
and he was a direct investor in the direct investor group of the Macau casinos. So that gentleman, Mr. Fok, would be more directly associated, according to my records, to men named Stanley Ho, Chang Yu-tun. This is the ownership group of the Macau casino monopoly, who, according to the records in Australia, the United States, Canada, have direct business relationships, unfortunately, with what are known as junket casino operations run directly by elite triad, that's Chinese organized crime figures. So there's a few of the names that were involved in that meeting and that I looked at.
So you discuss how in your book, and it's actually been presented even to the RCMP, how there was money filtering through at Great Canadian's gaming session, Great Canadian's casinos. But there's something that you describe in your book which is really important, and that's called the Vancouver model. Maybe you could walk us through what exactly this Vancouver model is.
Sorry, I'm just having a technical issue. I need to plug in my phone, so bear with me, Anthony. Sorry about that.
Okay, well, I'm glad we're not on a government investigation and interview.
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. The question is, in a nutshell, maybe you could walk us through what you uncovered is called the Vancouver model, in terms of how monies were actually filtered into Canada.
Yes, so the Vancouver model directly connects to what I discussed flowing out of these meetings in Hong Kong. It relates to how money gets out of China, essentially. So we have the capital controls that everyone knows about. Any citizen in China is limited to exporting $50,000 US per year. And yet there's tremendous appetite and demand for the wealth created in China to move out internationally. So this leads to the development of services, as the evidence in my book from FinTrack, that's Canada's financial anti-money laundering watchdog, says it leads to a development of services to help these funds move out of China underground. And what that relates to is casino activity. So talking again about the Macau casinos, Chinese citizens are allowed to gamble there, but they have really not many legal ways of getting their money there. What they do is they travel to Macau. They essentially meet up with junket operators who, in almost all cases, are connected to triads, that's the Chinese organized crime, and these gangs facilitate the loan activity. So in a simple explanation, this Macau junket operation activity that facilitates Chinese citizen gambling moved into Vancouver, Canada as a very primary international node. And it was the exact same junket operators who have deep crime roots through triads in Vancouver and Toronto. They would travel to Macau and recruit what are known as whale gamblers, who are very active in the Macau casinos, the biggest in the world. And these junket loan shark gangster operators from Vancouver and Toronto invite and make contracts to the whale gamblers in Macau, say, come to Vancouver or Toronto, you can access our underground banking services. You will land, for example, in Richmond Airport. We will meet you outside the casino with a bag of $500,000 in cash. Through those means, you can take the cash and easily buy casino chips. We also have connectivity inside the casino. So while this may seem to you, the whale gambler, as a risky transaction, it's not. Here's the key. That $500,000 in $20 bills comes from drug cash proceeds that are warehoused in Richmond, British Columbia. And it's a very simple operation. The loan sharks, these junket type operators that make the business connections in Macau, take actual warehouses of warehouse drug cash in Richmond, deliver them to the whale gamblers. The whale gamblers gamble with ease at casinos such as the government-administered River Rock Casino. So they've laundered $500,000 in drug cash, and now they will pay back the gang operators in China or Hong Kong. So in this way, drug money proceeds in Richmond, British Columbia, from triad fentanyl, cocaine, heroin trafficking is laundered through the casino, and there's a contract to pay it back in China, East Asia, where the gang has its fentanyl production operations. So you can see how the money goes into fentanyl factories through these repayments. It funds more shipments of drugs into Vancouver especially, and the cycle repeats.
And now the people can only bring out $50,000 a year per person. That's an annual, isn't it? An annual amount that they can bring out, the 50,000. So, but they can bring money from Hong Kong or China into Macau at any limit, right? They could bring $1 million if they wanted, correct?
Well, no, actually in Macau, there still are those capital export limits. So that system still exists in Macau, yet there are, through these junket operators, which are slightly more official than what we see in Canada, which would be unofficial junket operators, deals can be arranged where you can get funds in a way that might look a little bit more legitimate into Macau and indeed Australia. But make no mistake, these junket operators that are based in Macau and Hong Kong are directly connected to these high-level triads that I'm talking about, names such as the 14K, Sun Yian, Big Circle Boys. So what I want to get across is, in Canada, the flow of funds through this underground banking system is off the charts. BC's Anti-Money Laundering Commission just came out with its final report. They identified 1.4 billion in large cash transactions in BC government casinos in 1 year. This is the peak of money laundering, 2014 fiscal year. And Justice Cullen, the commissioner, said much of that money can be determined to be criminal proceeds. It's incredible funds, completely coming through underground banking. However, these very same gang operators also very involved in Australia and Macau through slightly more legitimized means. But what I'm saying is this is an international system. It involves access to international banks. The big five Canadian banks are involved. And so it's not, although cash is the real mind blower in the Vancouver model, it's been discovered that shell companies, what would appear to be legitimate companies in Hong Kong and China, are very much part of this international underground system, and yet accessing, able to transfer large amounts of funds directly into big five Canadian banks. This was found in the Cullen Commission.
Okay, I want to dig through this because you brought in where we want to get to, which is understanding how this is getting into our Canadian financial system. Take the situation you just mentioned. The individual comes off the plane from Macau or from Hong Kong, is given 500,000 of chips or of cash, walks into the casino with the hockey bag full of money, changes that into chips. That doesn't then get to buy a house. Let's talk to how that gets into buying a house. And the other part that I want to extend that to is you mentioned 2014, 1.4 billion. 1.4 billion sounds like a lot of money. But when houses are selling on average and condos are selling on average for $1.5 million, 2 million, 3 million, it's not that much money. I mean, it's a lot of money, but it's a few thousand condos. So talk to us about how it makes its way into actually buying hard assets here.
Right. So we need to talk about the networks involved. So as I indicated earlier, the casino side of the transactions are really the most beautiful for law enforcement because you can directly see the activity, but it goes, the casinos are almost what I call sort of a tool in the operation. So they're not facilitating the major flows into real estate, but they're indicating the actors involved. So just in a simple nuts and bolts of transaction, I'm taking this without a name, but from real evidence. Let's say there's a wealthy official in southern China. They want to get some funds because it's always a good investment strategy to diversify in China's system for political reasons. They want to get some funds and perhaps some children educated in Vancouver. So they meet this triad loan shark operator in Macau. They make a deal to, let's say they want to get, and this is a realistic figure, 5 million out of China in, let's say, 3 years. So they're gonna make plans to travel every Chinese New Year to Richmond, BC, and let's say get about 3 million in transactions per year. So they have the ability to raise 3 million in cash in Richmond, BC annually, get around those 50K per year capital controls. Let's take one transaction. They walk into the casino. Again, this comes from real evidence with $1 million in one night. No problem buying chips with let's say two suitcases with $20 in drug cash. Let's say, you know, they don't even break even that night. They gamble for a few days, and they take away with them $500,000 in, after they've lost $500,000 worth of chips, so to speak. They take away a casino check for $500,000. There's your down payment on a nice condo. That is direct money laundering, easy access with Canadian government stamped approval, $500,000 check. And so you've got your toehold in Vancouver's real estate market. That's a one-off money laundering transaction.
But let me understand. You're not just making, Sam, just so for all the people listening, you're not just making this up. You're not giving us the name, but these are actual court documents, individuals that have been identified. You're not making this up. These are happening, and this is just the ones that they've uncovered. It's my understanding that there are many more that you've just that have occurred, but just have gone unnoticed.
No, these are direct data points and evidence. So I've talked about a gambler who gambled $1 million in one night in the Richmond casino. I know, because I've seen the evidence, that he represents himself as a real estate developer. I know that he has suspected direct triad connections. And so we're talking just about walking you through the simple way to buy one condo. However, this whale gambler that could be connected to, you know, let's say, I'm thinking of another person, $6 million in suspicious transactions per year, and is a real estate developer. Also a known fentanyl precursor importer suspect of one of the biggest gamblers I'm thinking about in BC. These individuals were laundering money on one-offs, as I spoke about, to get their toehold into a condo, but then through many more complex transactions, they become real estate developers in British Columbia. They're also using BC court systems to enforce loans that they give out to other gamblers in the casino, and laundering money into real estate in that way. But without going through a whole book of evidence, I'll jump ahead, and this is really where I like to go to what I call the upstream issue. Let's circle back to these Hong Kong tycoons that we're talking about.
Yep.
They, from top to bottom, are involved in these Vancouver model international transactions, and yet they literally are investors in banks in Hong Kong. They literally own casinos, and they, I'm talking of men such as Stanley Ho and Shang Yutun, have developed large portions of Vancouver. So we can go from the bottom end, how you would launder money into one condo, to the top end, how you can become a tycoon with connections to this model and be developing large portions of a city. And this is happening in Toronto as well.
So it's coming in, the $6 million, again, 10 million, let's say it's 20. I think I've read some of your comments where there were situations even in excess of 10 and tens of millions of dollars. But these are not enough to sort of, let's say, skew the market? Like when we do our on the ground shops that I've been out there with Steve Soretsky doing shops, I mean, there are transactions taking place in excess of $10 million for houses there in West Van. And so tell me how this next part works, because they only have, whatever, the 1 million, the 5 million, and yet they're able to buy these properties that are 20. So are they getting financing? Are people buying them cash? What's happening?
Yeah, so I would, to answer the question, I'd point to two things that I've reported on. One is, you can't find this from CMHC or Canadian federal statistics or BC government statistics, but I was reliably informed that in Vancouver real estate, a massive market, for every dollar that's spent, 30 cents of that dollar, so 30% of Vancouver's real estate market, can be ultimately tied to funds from mainland China. Now let's circle back and remember that there are very big barriers to getting any significant money for individual investors, hopeful homeowners, even large companies, of course. There are very big barriers to get money out of China and into Canada. So how is that 30% flow that I'm talking about, credibly informed, how is it facilitated? And I'm arguing the casino money laundering activity, currency exchange offices that facilitate transactions directly into Canadian banks, underground banking internationally, a whole network of actors is evidently a very big part of that 30% flow of funds into Vancouver. So that's one sort of broad answer to your question. Another is a direct case evidence. I cited in the book that there was a secret RCMP intelligence study that discovered in all Vancouver real estate at the high end. So they studied in 1 year, 2016, every sale in the $3 million to $30 million bracket. And through their intelligence and criminal data banks, they identified 10% of all of those monies could be tied to this underground banking and organized crime actor model. That is 1 billion in real estate in 2016. 10% of the high end of the Vancouver market alone could be directly connected to organized crime networks and suspects. That's a big amount. Jumping over for the latter half of my answer to Toronto, I've written recently about an individual. There's some legalities around the case, so I'm just I'll stick without a name. I'm also still investigating, but a family that's directly related to a corruption case that touches upon the highest levels of the Chinese Communist Party. A Xi Jinping family member is involved. This person is wanted in China, actually just went to court after being in jail for a number of years. They happen to be a dual Canadian citizen. They're wanted for destabilizing the whole Chinese financial system. And they're suspected of major financial criminal activities. And yet their family, we found, was tied to about $1 billion at least in Toronto real estate development recently, in recent years. That is one family, 1 billion, directly tied to perhaps the biggest Chinese political system corruption case. What I'm saying is, and what I've found and what I'm continuing to work on, is major developers, some of them born in Canada, some of them born offshore, many of them living offshore in Vancouver and Toronto, who would appear to be legitimate. My source evidence is that they would be, let's just say, financially backed by offshore money. So they're a front. That's what it looks like. These are big level transactions. So we're not just talking about 1.4 billion in large cash, suspicious cash in BC government casinos that somehow dips and curves into the market with a small impact. It's just an indicator of many other financial flows and involved with these networks.
All right, we could expand into many books worth of your examples. In the interest of time, I'm going to do two things. First, I'm going to remind all our viewers that if they have questions, to scroll down to the bottom and just hover over the Q&A and type in a question. I'm happy to make sure that Sam addresses it. So money's been coming in. Money's been coming into Vancouver. It's been coming into Toronto for sure. As far as what you've seen in case records, it seems that our regulators, RCMP, FINRA, et cetera, as you've mentioned, have been somewhat complacent to this. Is that safe to say, or where are we with that part of the story?
That, to me, that's totally accurate. Not only complacent, but we have many good investigators. We have a tremendous amount of financial intelligence in FinTrack, but it was found in the recent commission into money laundering in British Columbia. The Commissioner Cullen essentially rebuked FinTrack, saying, in Ottawa, you have all this intelligence and almost none of it leads to RCMP cases and prosecutions. I can directly testify that I'm aware of what are called suspicious transaction reports in some, I'm thinking of an immigration case and that I accessed one for. We're seeing reports that directly connect to what I know are foreign interference suspects that are using very politically connected law firms. So I'm talking about a volume of cases and evidence and powerful and sensitive cases that FinTrack has knowledge of that never make it anywhere near a real police investigation, let alone a judicial prosecution. And what my sources would say, these are very well-respected internationally RCMP or former RCMP investigators, is Canada law enforcement is fighting a big uphill battle in terms of the requirements, the thresholds they have to meet to introduce evidence, easily obtainable evidence on these powerful crime networks to Canadian courts is very high in comparison to, for example, the United States or Australia. And everyone knows that the Canadian Charter of Rights is a very important document for the vast majority of Canadians. But I have all kinds of sourcing that says it's also become, through unintended consequences, a very powerful criminal defense tool and a tool that makes civil forfeiture of these people for assets from these networks very difficult. Those are just a couple of the issues, but I think it's beyond argument. I can point to any number of high-level assessments that Canada's organized crime laws are completely ineffective in dealing with actual real-life organized crime. That comes from a former RCMP Deputy Commissioner, I believe, Peter German, and it was cited in the Cullen Commission, his own evidence.
You testified in the Cullen Commission, if I understand correctly. Yep.
He did testify, yes.
No, you didn't. Wasn't your information used during in that investigation as well?
A lot of there. If you go into the Cullen Commission records, I think you can see over 50 of my journalism stories are cited as reading material for the commission lawyers. Yeah. My name did come up in the hearings a lot of times in the mouths of people representing casino executives or loan sharks. But to simply answer your question, yes, my work did. Some people say was material to both the launching of the commission and some of the evidence that came out.
All right, we're going to have you out at our housing conference because I know you're working on some new findings, especially of what's going on in Toronto. But I do want to make sure that we understand what this all means. So you did mention big five Canadian banks. We can call it big six. I know you like to say big five, but I don't want to leave National Bank out. They're important. So the big six banks, you're saying that, how would you say that they're involved? You mentioned they're involved. What would be their involvement?
So again, leaning on evidence from the Cullen Commission, there was a case study that pointed to a People's Liberation Army corruption case suspect who owned something in the order of over 200 acres of prime real estate in China. ran away from the case there, landed in Vancouver, bought at least $30 million worth of real estate. This is a key one. The daughter was a university student and bought a mansion worth 14 million back in 2010 dollars. So that's probably about 30 million today. These are all massive red flags to the issues I'm talking about. But the real point here is that the commission lawyers dove into this case, which is in immigration hearing findings, and they found that among that something of the order of $100 million, which this corruption suspect from China got into Canada, millions of those funds tied to several currency exchanges in Hong Kong. A deep dive into these currency exchanges found that they had direct links to these very same triad networks that I'm talking about, direct links to the highest level underground bank, which was discovered in British Columbia in our CMP investigations that really spurred my findings and came up in the commission. So we're talking about a Richmond building in an office tower that's estimated to be laundering $1 billion annually. This is all related to these Hong Kong currency exchanges I'm discussing. And the commission lawyers subpoenaed Canadian banks and said, can you please answer if you've received transactions from just these 4 currency exchanges related to one case? And the subpoena came back with the evidence showing the big 5 banks, or the big 6, I'm not sure if the 6th one was in there, so we'll say big 5, in 10 years, only looking at British Columbia bank accounts for the big 5 banks, they received over, I believe it was $167 million from these 4 currency exchanges in Hong Kong. I just want to underline this point. It's only 4 currency exchanges. There are, I don't know how many in Hong Kong and Vancouver related to this activity, but 4 currency exchanges had sent that much money directly into big Canadian banks in BC using Hong Kong registered companies that from at the surface would appear to be legitimate, but once you dig into them, they're just shells and fronts in an international banking system that directly connects to, Panama Papers entities that we all know about, and they're flowing funds directly into big 5 Canadian banks. I'm saying, and the evidence indicates, this connects to the highest level triad networks that are the center of the book I've written and the BC Commission into Anti-Money Laundering. And you may say, so what is the consequences for the Canadian banks identified in this one case study? I don't think many, and we don't know, because in the commission, there was a private hearing. Lawyers successfully got it in camera into something to do with the big Canadian banks. I don't even know if related to this case I just talked about, but I would advise, anyone watching this show that it would be prudent for Canadian investors to be curious and skeptical about the integrity of our financial institutions, because I believe there are more bombshells to come out.
Wow, that's some pretty heavy hitting stuff there. I'm just going to launch our poll here so that everybody can tell us what a great job you've done so far for us with your findings. Sam, you mentioned the numbers. I mean, I look at it one point, the 167 million, and that was just one case and 4 currency exchanges, as you mentioned. You mentioned the 1.2 billion. I mean, the size of our current mortgage market in Canada at 1.8 or so trillion. I mean, it's like these are small numbers relative to the size and scale of our entire housing market. So how would you argue with me that, these are interesting findings, but let's move on?
I mean, it's a fair point. There's 2 ways to answer that. Being a veteran of the real estate affordability debates in Vancouver, I would argue that, again, we're, the Canadian mortgage market, as we now know, whenever the central bank raises interest rates, that will be the most dominant factor, clearly, in Canada's housing market. But in Vancouver, again, let's remember this: 30% of all funds making its way into Vancouver real estate somehow connects to mainland China. As I've indicated, in mysterious ways, that can make it into Big Five Canadian banks. I'm arguing that in many cases, organized crime and underground banking has to be related to those transactions. Again, many of the biggest developers, who are a very unexamined, sort of actor in this underbelly that I'm talking about, they are the ones that decide yay or nay if supply will go forward. And I'm saying that in many cases there are secretive, murky funds behind these big developers. Another last point is a person such as my colleague Stephen Punwasi, a very sharp individual who comments a lot on social media about housing issues. He reported, I believe his work was cited by Peter German in Peter German's own independent review of money laundering issues, that often it can be the most, let's say, at the margins, the most aggressive investors, the ones that are least concerned with price, can be very influential to price in markets. So as I've said, if 10% of the monies identified in this RCMP study that I'm talking about at the high end in Vancouver real estate have no price sensitivity, and yet they can capture a large portion of the luxury market, you can see, and Mr. Panwasi and others have argued, that that can be influential to the whole market. If you have, even if it's a small percentage of the whole market, really a driver of prices can coming from a nefarious network can do a lot.
And we've argued this too. The real estate is an illiquid market, and the best source that's used for house prices is comparable transactions. So all it takes is one overpriced or high priced, let's call it, transaction in a particular market, and it's like throwing a pebble into a very calm pond. It continues to ripple through and raise the prices of all the other properties in said market. One last thing, Sam, is now that this study's come out, you've been at this now for really, if I go back, it's about 15 years that you've been at it, or more actually, that you've been reporting on this. Has it slowed down? Is it because if it does, it could have rippling effects the same way as when it came in. So has it slowed down because we've gotten more? People are, at least organizations, are becoming more aware of it, or where do you see that going?
It's a difficult question. I mean, I can start by saying the most serious factor at the core of what I'm looking at on financial integrity is the laundering of hard drug proceeds by the most powerful international gangs have made Vancouver and Toronto global centers for their operations, to the point where Canada, not even just talking about housing prices, is seen as a liability. And this is not an exaggeration, to our international partners. And it has the flow of fentanyl, the proceeds generated from it in Toronto and Vancouver hasn't slowed at all. That the fentanyl overdose crisis and the power of these gangs hasn't slowed down at all. So that to me indicates that the funds generated, Canada being used as a money laundering center globally, hasn't slowed down. I just, my sense is at the high end, the real estate developers that I'm talking about that can be, according to evidence that I've cited and I'm still working on, directly connected to high-level organized crime, directly connected to prominent Canadian law offices, directly connected, I won't get off topic, but this is an important one, I believe, to some influential Canadian politicians. This hasn't slowed down at all. So it'll come out in the wash. I don't know how directly related, this general sort of market downturn is related to the issues I'm looking into, but I know that the funds, the nefarious underground belly funds that I'm looking at are influential and broadly in Canada.
All right. Sam, we'll get some, I know you're working on some other interesting findings, especially here in the Toronto market. Now you're moved to Ottawa. So we'll look forward to having you at our housing conference on October 6th and digging through some other of your findings. Thanks everyone for your attention. And if you have any follow-up questions, by all means, send them along. Sam, keep it up.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for everyone putting up with my homework situation here. Talk soon.
Just pull back your camera and we'll see how it is. Okay, good. Take care, Sam.